Baby, tell me if you like it. Tell me if you like it now. As long as you're cool, right here is where you wanna be. As long as you're cool, baby, tell me how you like it, like it, like it, like it. As long as you're cool, here is where you wanna be. As long as you're cool, baby, tell me how you like it, like it, like it.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Victoria Lesor. I'm the Chief of Staff here at the Athena Center for Leadership at Barnard College, and it's my privilege and pleasure to welcome you all to the 13th Annual Athena Film Festival. On behalf of everyone at Barnard and Women in Hollywood, it is my honor to welcome you here today. This festival is dedicated to celebrating the voices and stories of bold, courageous women leaders and the filmmakers who bring those stories to life. This year's festival would not be possible without the support of our dedicated sponsors. Please join me in thanking Athena's founding sponsor, the Artemis Rising Foundation, and its CEO and founder, Regina K. Scully, whose visionary leadership makes our work possible. You'll see the names of our sponsors on screen before every film, and we're grateful to all of them. Our festival may look and feel a little bit different this year for some of you. And in an effort to foster an inclusive environment, many of our screenings are playing with open captions, and several events, including this one, have ASL interpretation and real-time CART services. We're grateful to the Lorene Arbus Foundation and our festival's accessibility sponsor for helping us elevate the festival's accessibility and open pathways to deeper inclusion. And now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our panel on leadership from below the line. I'm grateful to our partners at NYWIFT, New York Women in Film and Television, for their support in bringing this panel to life. And moderating this panel, we have the incredible Rachel Watanabe-Batten. Rachel has been a producer of film and television and popular culture for more than 20 years. She's the founder of New York-based production company Contradiction and Struggle. She sits on the board of NYWIFT, and she has too many credentials for me to count, so I'll let her go into her experience. We're just so honored to have Rachel here with us. Joining Rachel on stage, we have Canella Williams-Larrabee, who's a unit production manager with over 15 years of experience in the film and television industry. I'll move over as you ladies join me. We also have Deirdre Elizabeth Govan, multi-hyphenate costume and production designer, and Rochelle Brown, who's the vice president of sales at Harbor Picture Company. And so, please join me in thanking our panelists and our moderator for being here today. And with that, Rachel, I will turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. First, thank you, Victoria, for that lovely introduction and for inviting us here, as well as Melissa Silverstein. Now, am I too loud or too soft? Is it fine? All right. I tend to be loud, so my family tells me, and if I laugh, I better pull the mic away. So really, I'm honored to be up here in conversation with you three amazing women, really, and I say that because they're each leaders in their field, and I have I know them each in different ways. Deirdre, although I'm just meeting you today, I have called your agent to try to, work with you and an admirer of her work. And I think, one of the things Canella and I connected over now a few years was over the New York, now say the acronym.
New York Film and Television for Diversity and Inclusion.
And what are you calling it?
NIFTY.
NIFTY. Okay, so NIFTY started virtually. I guess we were together having meetings, and it was a little crazy, but at the times of Black Lives Matter and
George Floyd
and Me Too and you name it, Oscar's So White. There was a lot of thought about like, oh, what should we do as diversity and inclusion activists by force, kind of like meaning by necessity, right? It's just, we're just filmmakers and artists. And then I was really admiring how she and several other hiring managers, people who actually give people jobs, came together to do some work, and that I was excited to be a part of after having been involved in many other kind of equity organizations that didn't quite meet the mark. So it was really having impact, and you can talk a little bit more about that, but I found that quite amazing. Rochelle Brown is a newer friend and really just amazing, and her impact on a film that I was recently producing with filmmaker Julie Dash, who is renowned for being the first African-American woman with a widely released film. We were trying to do something for a museum that's opening up this year. And it's called Seeking, and the film is called Seeking, but the museum is the International African American Museum, which will open in Charleston in June. And it's not a lot of money necessarily for these things, right? And so you, as a producer, have to find colleagues, right? Also, you don't want to just, hey, working with very esteemed creators, and you want to give them the best craftspeople to work with. And so you have to find people who also value the things that you do. And that's why I think it's important, she really helped us and helped sort of demystify and say what Harbor could do, who the best artists would be, all those things. And so when we talk about leadership, I think we often see these things, big writer-directors, right? So what I wanted to have each of you, I'm sorry to kind of give you your pre-introductions, but it was really about why I value you and your input. If you could each share with us kind of how you came into film and television, and then we'll kind of get into what you do, and then more the ways that you can impact the work that you are in the whole production. So Canella, let's start with you, because production starts with a UPM and line producer.
I went to film school, so that was one. And from there, I figured, I went for producing and directing, and one of the things that I was taught was when you leave school, the chances of you directing and producing right out of the gate is just kind of slim to none. So I decided to, okay, well, let me try to get an internship. So I actually, this was back when Craigslist was a thing. And so I answered a Craigslist ad for a Steven Soderbergh produced movie, indie movie. Lodge Kerrigan was directing, who's this wonderful indie director. He also does TV now. And I had put in my resume, and the production supervisor had called me, who's now like a big exec at a studio now. And she was like, oh my God, your resume is fantastic, because I had work experience before college. And she was like, how would you like to be paid instead? Because that was back when they didn't pay you for internships, it was all free. And I was like, sure. And she's like, well, we have this really difficult director. He's fired his last 2 assistants. How would you like to be his assistant? And I was like, I love difficult people.
Awesome.
I was like, I get along with difficult people. So I was like, yeah, let's do this. And that was my first job. And from there, I kind of saw what that production supervisor was doing, and it was really interesting. Even though I was working closely with the director, and I was editing the scripts, I was, doing the next pass of the script, which was great with my final draft, and learning so much and being next to him on set. I realized that the people who were making the movie happen were production. So the people in the production office, production on set. And so I was like, hey, can you show me what you do? I kind of shadowed and figured out a few things and figured out who was union and who wasn't, because I really wanted my health care back. So I went up through the production office, which I actually which I loved, because you start at the beginning. So you get the script, you meet the directors, you're talking to the actors, and then from there, then you're in production. You're ordering the equipment. Sometimes you're hiring the crew, depending on what your position is, before I, production managed. And then you're wrapping everything up. You're doing if it's a movie, you're doing the film credits as well. So you're typing all that up. Now I'm aging myself, typing it up and submitting that. And you're also dealing with the studio or the production services company. So I kind of went up with that and then figured out, I saw what the unit production manager was doing. Oh, the unit production manager is in the Directors Guild. Oh, well, I want to be a director, so why don't I just get in the Directors Guild and I'll work my way up from there. And one of the ways of getting in is mainly people join as assistant directors. I knew that I was not an assistant director. Was like, I didn't have the personality for it, so how do I get from being where I am in the office to being a unit production manager, which was definitely something that I saw myself doing, and then producing, and then eventually directing as well, produce my own projects. So same thing, when I went from different movies, different TV shows, it's all freelance, so it's like word of mouth. So there was no more Craigslist involved after the first job, which was great. And so I just kept like, can you teach me how to do a budget? Why is this important? The safety aspects. How do I get into the DGA without being a director, assistant director? And there were various different ways. And so I kind of dipped my toe into everything. And one thing I did was do non-DGA jobs, Directors Guild jobs, as a unit production manager, but they were still union jobs, they were still theatrical release, they were still A-list actors. But I was able to get my experience that way and join the Directors Guild, but there's various different ways. And so that's kind of how I did it. And as far as like a unit production manager, it's like we do everything. It's that same thing where you're there pretty much from the beginning, not development, but you're there in prep. You hire all of the department heads. Sometimes, depending on who the producer is, you're also hiring the costume designer, the production designer, but you hire everyone. So you are everyone's point of contact. You're the one. You're making the list. You're making the list. You're getting people hired. So it's like, yeah, you're in charge. Hey, Canella, who do you like? And so it's like, oh, this person's great. And so you get this wonderful body of professionals that kind of, they're always checking in and always relying on you, and you can give them jobs and create a fantastic team. And also, as a unit production manager, you're part of the director's team. So you're there to also support the director on set, along with the first AD and the second AD. So I would go in, I always check in with my AD department, check in with my actors, check in with the line producer, who's my, boss, and make sure that everything's running smoothly. And a lot of the times, I'm the only one of authority on the set that can shut it down, say we have to go next, because the producer, a lot of times, if you're working on a television series, they're out scouting for the next episode. So then you're the one in charge.
Even on a film, right?
Yeah, on a film, a lot of times.
UPM is holding everything down.
Absolutely.
And they're the point of contact for everyone.
Yeah.
Of authority.
Yeah, so I mean, that's what I do, and that's how, how I got started. And it's just keeping those contacts. And it's like, sometimes you think you're bothering people by emailing them or texting them. You're not, because they will forget about you if you don't contact them. Just to say that you're available, hey, let's get a coffee, just do that. When people do that with me, I never see it as a bother. I'm like, oh yeah, they were really good. No, oh, I have a project coming up. Oh yeah, why don't you, let's hire you on this.
You're also a mentor to many new hires. And also, you can make or break someone who is a department head by assisting them when they have really challenging situations, which often come up, right? We're dealing with creative, empathic people in a not the easiest time, right, in the world. And so, you know, I think that the work that Canella does as a unit production manager and also now as a line producer is, you know, is part of the job, but she's also bringing her personality, right? And her sense of how to make people comfortable and do their best work, right? So I want to just say that's part of leadership as well. And what you're doing in making a schedule is assigning value. So we'll get to that part too, but I want to move on now to Deirdre, who is a department head. And I think one of the most important ones, you know, for me as a producer, like the costume designer is creating the character with you. And there's a whole closet, like if you're doing particularly in television, but you know, that they have to pull from. So, but they are also the person that sees the talent naked, like physically, you know, all the emotion. And so that is a person that must be trusted. And so the sort of role you play is not just like, oh, let's look at the clothes, but if you could talk about how you got involved and then some of the work you do.
Okay, thank you. And I was just listening to Canella going, oh my God, can we just clone her? Because we need really, I think, a line producer and a UPM is our first point of contact as a department head when we're hired. So the chemistry between department heads and a UPM and a line producer is crucial. And when you find someone like Canella, who is very tuned in to the needs and what needs to happen with us as department heads, it is a relationship that is very rewarding when it works. But in terms of the question, I have been in the field as a working costume designer since the mid-90s. So I started, I am a graduate of Parsons School of Design and Pratt Institute. I did study fashion design and art history, costume history and theory, and then I ended up finishing in strategic design management. And that was a very interesting switch because I knew very early on in the fashion design program at Parsons, which is quite rigorous, that my designs were great, but I knew I did not want to be a fashion designer. My love for film and telling stories extends far back as my childhood. So I knew it was something very personal to me. I knew it was, for lack of a better word, it was a calling. And I knew when I had a design critique from two of my professors and they said to me, I don't think that'll sell on 7th Avenue. And I took that as a sign that this was not my place. And at that time, I didn't feel that that was my tribe, so to speak. So I had done quite a few internships. I worked for Giorgio Armani, I worked for Romeo Gigli, I worked for Adrian Vittadini, I worked for several fashion designers. Marc Jacobs was one of my first design critics, and Isaac Mizrahi, so that just gives you an overview of where I started. And then I was working at a private label company that did original designs for Saks, Neiman's, and I had an opportunity to step aside, and I decided when I made a call to a family friend that it wasn't for me. And he said, I want to introduce you to some people. And he introduced me to the supervisor of Saturday Night Live, the wardrobe supervisor. And basically, he also introduced me to the business agent for the Theatrical Wardrobe Union, which is not costume design, it is wardrobe, and they are responsible for the maintenance of the costumes and the care of the costumes and making sure the actor or the talent is in the right costume. And with that, I started knocking on doors, had received I'd say a temporary go-ahead from the union to swing on Broadway. And so I worked on Broadway shows as Miss Saigon, Les Miserables, and Phantom of the Opera. And because I had detailing ability, I did aging and dyeing and fine beadwork and also reconstruction of costumes. So therein, my background in fashion design and construction and pattern making, those skill sets definitely were extremely necessary and really set me apart from the fact that I did have a design skill set from others that came in still as costumers and dressers, but when you have that skill set, that's your core. So that propelled me to an opportunity to go overseas. I was called upon, well, introduced to someone who was doing the opera for Porgy and Bess for the Gershwin, which is by George and Ira Gershwin, and it was the Houston Grand Opera. And they were going on tour, and it was an international tour. So I toured with that company for almost a year, and we were all over the world in 27 countries, and I was responsible for taking those costumes and rebuilding them because they had already worn out, and actors' bodies change. And if anyone's familiar with Porgy and Bess, you are dealing with a specific body type. So it was understanding construction. It's architecture, but for the body. So I was there all over Europe for 9 months, and then I got a call from a friend of mine who I had worked with on Saturday Night Live dressing, and she said, I just got this new TV series, do you want to come back and do it with me? So she got the series as a supervisor, and she asked me to come in and be a set costumer. And I did. I got on a plane from Sweden, and I came back, and that Monday on set on my television gig. And I started at the bottom as a costumer, and I had worked my way up. I did that show for 2 years. It was a show called New York Undercover by Dick Wolf. It was one of his projects, experiments, I guess. And really utilizing the same Law and Order crew, people who were already a part of the mothership. So I would go back and forth between that show and that one. And then when the show went down for the summer months, I stepped in to do film. And I got an opportunity to do my first big film working in background and working with military costumes. And that first film was Peacemaker with George Clooney and Nicole Kidman. And I call this my summer of George Clooney because not only was I the stand-in dresser for him on Saturday Night Live for a blood gag, I was also on Peacemaker, and then I also was on One Fine Day, which was a film that he did with Michelle Pfeiffer. So always as a background costumer because I was working my way up. And over time, and I just want to preface, this is not design, this is wardrobe, this is costuming. And over time, I knew that I wanted to get back to my roots, which was really designing and creating worlds. And when I had the chance, I did non-union jobs so I can cut my teeth and build my credits. And my first non-union film was with one of my icons, John Cryer. And anyone who knows John Hughes's films, John Cryer was central character in Pretty in Pink, and he was Ducky. So he wrote a screenplay. I don't even remember how it came to me, but I had an opportunity, I interviewed, and I got the job, and I designed his film. And it was fun and amazing. And then I continued to moonlight as a costume designer on non-union projects while I was working my union job as a costumer. At this point, I had moved into assistant supervising, which no longer exists now, but that was the step before you became a supervisor. And I started supervising shortly thereafter on other projects. And eventually, I had an opportunity to fully step away from supervising. And it came with a break, and that break was when I was tired, and I said, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. This is a lot. So I left the industry and went to grad school. And I went to Pratt and received my master's in interior architecture and design, which is a focus on set design and exhibition design. And some people would ask me, well, why didn't you just go to Yale or NYU? And the reason was because that I had been in the business now for so long that I had colleagues of mine who said it would be a waste for you to go back and learn something that you already know. If you go back, it's for the connections that you make, but it's not that you're going to learn anything new. If you go to grad school, you should try and consider something that will propel you or keep you when you leave this business or if you decide to leave this business. So it was a cautionary reminder that our business is not stable and it is not made for those who are looking for a 9-to-5. It's a certain type of personality that it has to be able to bob, pivot, and weave and adjust. And I just knew for me I wanted a safety net because I know what happens when you don't have that in our business. And so I made that my priority. And having said that, I did have an opportunity to production design a few projects. I did that. And they were small, non-union projects. And then I had an opportunity to come in and costume design a union project. And then I never looked back. So I've pretty much been a costume designer, supervisor, assistant supervisor, key, and set costumer. I've fulfilled every role in the costume department. So I'm very comfortable in my skin and understanding of what that requires and what is necessary. And it was one of my, I like to call her my mentor, but a designer that I worked for who was also a former supervisor. She was a very successful costume designer for television, and she said to me, you will find that your skill sets as a supervisor and working in wardrobe will serve you very well as a costume designer because you are not linear in your thought process. You can be very clear on the business case and very clear on the creative case. And she was right. To this day, it's circling back to what I said earlier on about working with a UPM and a line producer, 70% of the work as a costume designer is not designing. Yeah. It's about management, it's about budget, it's about balancing all types of logistics and personalities and demands. And to be able to have foresight is something that I feel that I was blessed with from doing all of those years working as a costumer, working under stellar supervisors, understanding how they work, and understanding how they provide a service and support to their costume designer. So for me now as a costume designer, it's just important that I have that support on all sides, and then the creative comes into play. And that's the fun time. And basically my creative process is just that. It's the research. It starts with the script. It starts with the novel. It starts with
Deirdre,
whatever information.
we're going to get into those things, I think, because I do think that's important. But
Yes.
but hang on a moment.
Yes.
I do, you know, so much of what you've said is about building, obviously, your tribe, your team, right? So since we're at Athena, and this is the leadership center, really thinking about what does that look like? And part of being a leader is equipping yourself and surrounding yourself with people who can give you honest and helpful, constructive feedback, right? You don't need friends who are going to watch you fall off the cliff and take a picture of you. I mean, you can have people around, acquaintances that are fun, but I'm just, part of being a leader is also the care of, you know, a lot of us are freelance, right? And so you've got to preserve those relationships, build them, and it's constant. So thinking about leadership as also self-care, and, you know, you're building a foundation. And Rochelle now is, you know, post is like half of the job, really. And you can make or break, save a film, right? Create something where you're like, oh my gosh, this is a mess. And then the editor and the colorist and the sound design, like, oh, that's actually, that works, you know? But there's so much that happens. And so, you know, I would love for you to talk about your own, you know, trajectory, but also, I know you're an artist. We've discussed this. Everybody here is an artist, including myself, I would say. So, you know, I think that impacts how your approach a lot.
Yes, it does, actually. I have a bit of an unconventional journey. Many years ago, I was a sports science major in school, athletic training, doing my thing. I just didn't do my volunteer hours, and that's because something was stopping me. So in my senior year, I changed to media arts, which focusing on sound production, because music is my first love. And so family's upset, whatever have you. I applied for a paid internship through the Advertising Club of New York, in which I landed that internship, and I quit my job as a banking supervisor and did a summer internship my last semester at an advertising agency called Uniworld. And if you know Uniworld, it is the first African-American agency in the United States, started in 1969 through the movie, or the film, Shaft. And so from there, I worked the summer. They hired me after my internship because I was astute, I paid attention. It was quite interesting. In a couple of months, I was in a room with Reginald Hudlin talking about a Pepsi spot with Master P and Snoop Dogg. I'm like, really? Wow. 2 months ago, I was on the track and field, So anyway, so I did that. By the end of the year, they didn't have a production position for me, but I opted to stay at the company. I stayed there for a few more years, in which I became a media buyer. I bought radio and television time, and I spoke to the creatives, I hung out with the creatives. They're also responsible for sponsoring the Acapulco Black Film Festival. Now it's called the American Black Film Festival in Miami. I was a part of that. So I was always around directors, I was always around just the talent all the time, actors, just the energy. Finally, I grew a bit frustrated, even though my media buying job was quite cushy when you have Don Cornelius coming to pitch to you for Soul Train. But I wanted to be a producer. I wanted to be on set. That's just what it is. I did do freelance gigs. I was a boom operator. I've done numerous short films, movies with my few friends. It was exciting, but again, so I decided to quit the job and go back to school. And that's where I studied video production management and editing as well. While I was doing that, a colleague of mine also left the agency, and she was working in post-production. And she was like, do you want your foot in the door? We have a receptionist job available. I was like, you know what? Why not? I can study and do the reception. It won't take a toll on my brain. I can focus on my thesis, whatever have you. I did that, and within 6 months, I became a producer at that company. And it was off of an interesting project. This company landed Blue Bloods. It was the first episodic show for this company. And I was working in the vault, because I left from reception to working in the vault. And our deliverables were not going out on time for the dailies. And so I talked to the manager, the vault manager, and I said, I can handle it, because everyone else was having problems. I said, I can handle it. He's like, go right ahead. The executive producer came in 4 a.m. in the morning with all the tapes. Now, I'm dating myself because it's HD
Do they know what a
cams,
vault
digibetas, D-cams, all of that was going on, SRs, DVDs, a whole list of the dailies, and that went out. Anyway, so she came in with a handful of tapes and threw them on the counter and said, they have to go out now, it's all there. Just get it out now, now, now. I had to stop her in her tracks. This is a testament to my experience. I said, we are responsible for every piece of equipment that leaves this facility, and we have to track it properly. This will go out on time. I just have to be your checks and balances. And we got the tapes out. The next day, she said, it was perfect. Everybody's happy. Do you want to be a producer? That's how I got the job. And I never looked back. I spent 10 years at this company as a post-producer, color correction house, one of the top in the nation. I've worked on numerous Super Bowl spots, numerous Olympics, everything. I worked with Spike Jonze on his YouTube Music Awards, which was live, nine different sets at the Navy Yard. That was kind of crazy. I've done live set, color correction, producing on my side in Times Square for Express, where we have runway shows with models and different things of that nature. It's been a pretty exciting journey. From there, I moved on to another post-facility house, high-end visual effects company as executive producer, produced a ton of new work, and then I was bringing in long-form work at this company. in which we worked on, name a few, Zola, what's it, I don't know, there's so many projects in my brain, you have no idea. What else have we done? I see Kevin Costner for some reason. I can't remember. But nevertheless, we did I actually finished about 10 movies in 2020 at this company. That's when I knew I wanted to come out of commercials and move into long form, in which I'm now at Harbor Picture Company. Harbor's been around for 10 years, and they do both commercials and long form. And I've never looked back. Line producers call me all the time for their post budgets, to finish their post when the post supervisor is not hired yet. I don't talk to costume designers, but nevertheless, but that in a nutshell is my journey. In between though, I never gave up my music career. I'm a flautist. I've toured with Steel Pulse. I've played numerous reggae shows, reggae concerts. I've done numerous shows around the city, and I'm living life. I'm loving it, and that's my story in a nutshell.
Thank you, Rochelle. You're like, oh, when is your next concert? But I think what this speaks to, first of all, there's a theme. Everybody here has gone back to school, pretty well-educated people who are respectful of their crafts, right? And the hubris is pretty low, just the idea that I'm not going to do that. And I think one of the things that, and I will say I'm in my 50s, right, and I've done every kind of job from, being an assistant. I still will get coffee because I love coffee, so I'm like, what's the best coffee? Let's have that at the office. But I really think about the client services, right, and how I'm bringing some of my skills and myself and my values to the productions, right? And so, whether you're doing more outright advocacy, like a couple of these women, probably all of us deal with pay equity and inclusion and diversity issues literally every day of our lives, but also as activists, right? Because those are negotiations of when you're doing a budget, well, can't we get them for less or more? Or what is it that you want creatively? Who is that person you're going to bring on? Respectfully, what is their, whether it's a producer, we have something called a quote, right, with a studio, versus, what is the rate, that's the union rate versus not, what scale. And all of these are really negotiations and conversations about value, right? Because you're saying, oh, we're going to give the costume designer, oh, they have to build something. We're going to give them those months ahead because we actually have to also get our cast on board, and we have to start building that stuff 6 months, a year sometimes, or versus when someone's, okay, here's your first fitting and it's like 2 weeks out. I'm not sure what you think the costume designer is going to design in those 2 weeks, but it's, it's really paying attention and also respecting each of their roles to give them the time to think about who is the best artist, the best collaborator. So, that to me is what the integrity, and I also think something that particularly, I think all good people in film and television think about this, but I also think since we're talking about women's leadership, that it's something that we're almost innately brought up to think about, right? So, like bringing extra stuff to the set. We were talking about this, right? So, and just thinking about the big picture, right? And how someone's going to do better work when they are more empowered, right? How you also don't want to be a sycophant and then that person can't take any real, there's a real balance, right, to all of this because we're dealing with creative people. So one of the things for me that's important is, while we spend a lot of time doing the diversity and equity and inclusion work as women, and particularly as women of color and Black women, right, with individual backgrounds here, we're certainly not monolithic in our experiences and our perspectives, but how do you not get sidetracked into doing that work, right? And then your other real creative work suffers, right? This is sort of a dual responsibility for anybody who's conscious. I don't think this is exclusively women. But I think if we're trying to create change, what does that really look like? So some of what I think many of us have done is to really say, hey, I'll come on and do this, but really my legacy is my body of work. So I'd like to talk with each of you about sort of the things you're working on and what you're proud of, how your approach to that is maybe unique, but also when you feel things have worked and maybe when they haven't. But mostly I also want to understand, and also our audience to understand, the amazing projects you actually are working on and have. So I'll start with you, Canella, yeah.
It's like, see, I sat in the wrong spot. I start first all the time. No, I'm kidding. As far as what I'm working on right now, I am basically doing a feature film for Netflix and kind of developing what that is going to look like. We won't film until about October, November of this year. And so I've just been working very closely with them, trying to figure out where we're going to film, like as in what state. I work all over the country and sometimes overseas as well. And so I'm doing the budget for this and also the schedule. You want to do it in 25 days. Okay, this is what you can do in 25 days. You have all of these stunts. You have people crashing through windows and doing all this stuff. This is how much this is going to cost. It's going to cost this much if we pull back. Sometimes I talk about rewrites. So that's something that I'm working on right now. But before then, I was working for Apple TV Plus on a series that's going to come out in 2024 starring Tom Holland, which we all know is Spider-Man. It's not the Marvel universe or anything, but it's a very, very interesting project. I don't know how much of it I can talk about. That's another thing. A lot of times, like when things haven't come out yet, I can't speak about it. But it's a very big, high-profile project. And before then, I did again Netflix. Again, a lot of you may or may not know Raising Dion, which is about a little boy superhero. Michael B. Jordan's in the first season where he plays his dad and he gets his powers through this storm in Iceland. And so this child is the first one born with superpowers. And one thing that was great about doing that show is, the creator of the show, Dennis Liu, he started at comic books and made this a comic book and then kind of sold it to Netflix, and being a part and being able to meet him. And he's very involved in the Directors Guild, just like I am as well, in leadership and diversity and inclusion. And meeting him and being able to help bring his project to life. I didn't do the first season, but I did the second season. So along with Stranger Things, like we were on the same lot in Atlanta, Georgia. So it's like Stranger Things got everything, and us, we had to be much more creative about, okay, what are we going to do with special effects? So like dealing with Dennis and dealing with Carol Barbie, who was the showrunner, and then Montez Moreau, who was the line producer and also my mentor, and trying to figure out how to be smart about all these things. And I think, we did great with what we had. And I also featured Dennis on a DGA panel that we had on Zoom. And one thing, what I found fascinating about this, speaking about like diversity, equity, inclusion, is having an Asian American man writing a story about an African American child. And so I got to ask him about that, and he just had this admiration for African American women. And having the mom, the father, if anyone watched the show, the fat father passes away, and her having to raise this child. And so like for me, it really is about the stories. When I choose a project, I'll read the script. I'll turn it, I'm at a point in my career where I can things down. If I don't like it and it doesn't resonate with what I want my name to be on, and that's a fantastic feeling to be able to have, but again, work from the bottom up. And so that's one of the things, is just trying to develop it and having something that is meaningful. It's like we're all of us here are storytellers in what we do. All of us. And so it's like the joy of being able to be part of that creation process and realizing no matter what you do, all of us are creative, and everything you do has to is put into that world. You know, and then from there, I was just like, I kind of forget sometimes of the things that I do, because it's like I'm working all the time, which is another great thing. But, you know, I've done some Evil, which is on Paramount Plus. If anyone's ever seen that, that's like a whole. I'm very much into horror, so that was like a really exciting thing. And I worked on season 1, and we had to create the devil. And so being involved with, you know, special effects and the animatronics and having these meetings about this, I was just like giddy. Completely giddy, is like going back to trying to create this and working with the Kings, who are very much into horror, but you know, they also did The Good Wife and The Good Fight, and other sort of dramas, but being able to create that, and again, being part of that process, because a lot of what I do is figuring out how we're gonna have the money to do this. How do we have the crew to do all that stuff? So it's like, that's something that people don't think about. They'll think about, oh, this person created it. It's like, yeah, but not without me saying they have this much money. And speaking with the studios.
Yes.
And trying to get the money if we don't have it. And trying to convince everybody why we need it, or trying to move things around so that as much of the money is on screen as possible, but also with making sure that you're fair to the crew and the other people that are also creating it with their pay equity.
And on a series, you can get residuals if you're in the union, right? So this is something which you did NCIS New Orleans, which I watched many times, right? So it's also thinking about, right, the sustainability. So if you're a union member, you'll get residuals. If you're not, you won't, right? And this producers have plenty of complicated things we won't get into since we're talking about below the line, but oftentimes, right, people are looking at writer, director, blah, blah, blah. And if you're a DJ, director, yes, there's great things. But sometimes we're looking at the shiny thing. Like, I made much more money as a UPM than as a line producer or executive producer. I'll be honest. So let's think about the lives we want and what we're comfortable with when you make these decisions. Because, you know, depending on the impact you want to have, you know, Deirdre's talked about being a costumer, right? Those roles are also important, but having come up through that informs how you work, I assume, as a costume designer. It certainly does for me, because I was a producer's assistant and a coordinator and a production manager, all those things, and had to be the first one in and the last one out. And so when you've had that role, and costume department is for sure the first one in and the last one out, right? Because what are people doing in the day, right? They're getting dressed, and then the last thing they do is either take off their costume or their hair and makeup. So they actually have the longest days along with production. So Deirdre, you've worked on some amazing stuff. You were telling me a little bit about your Chiwetel, I don't know what else, but there's so many incredible series, particularly here in New York, you've worked on, but around the world. So I don't know what you'd like to share, but I'm an admirer also.
Back at you, Rachel. I agree, it does become a blur after a while, because I think all of us coming out of 3 years of a pandemic, things were kind of hazy. But I, fortunately, have worked the majority, if not all, of the pandemic, said the time that we were shut down in the industry for roughly almost 9 months. But I guess I'll just start with some general projects that I've done. So for TV, I did L Word Generation Q. And that was the reboot of the original L Word that was on Showtime and was very successful and lasted for years. And that was really exciting and challenging because, of course, I was a huge fan of the show. And it was groundbreaking in the area of diversity and inclusion, especially on the LGBTQ, oh God, I can't talk, LGBTQIA, sector. So it was very important to me to work on a project that I felt had such a strong legacy and a history and a following. And it was also a challenge, and I do love challenging projects, and the reason why it was a challenge, it was not just about women showing up in beautiful clothes, it was about how do you take 3 iconic characters and bring them to the now. And that was the mandate that was sent down by Showtime, and they were very happy with obviously what was produced, and I was very honored to have had that opportunity. A show most recently that I did was Harlem, season 1 and season 2, and that is an Amazon show. And that is a multicultural, diverse, Sex and the City for women of color. And it's women who are very well educated, who are fabulous, out of the box, unique in their own right. They're friends, very different stories, but they come together, and they were college roommates, were college friends. So the show's creator is Tracy Oliver, and I have a long-standing relationship with her, which has been quite rewarding and successful. I've done 4 projects with her, and that taps back into the importance of relationships in this industry, and working with people who really see your value and know what you bring to the table and respect and appreciate that. On the feature side, I most recently completed a film that premiered in November called Devotion. It's a big budget movie. It's a $100 million film. Lots of boys with toys. But it was a military film, and what people tend to miss about films of this nature is the level of detail and meticulous detail that has to go into recreating a war movie that is from a forgotten era, which is the Korean War. A lot of those pieces don't exist. So if it doesn't exist, what does that mean? Well, that means you have to make it. That means you have to build it. And so we built a significant amount of costumes. We did rent, of course, because we have rental houses in LA that we utilized. But the majority of the principal actors, if not all of them, their costumes were built and or manufactured. So it was a huge project. I had something about 2,500 to 5,000 BG for the run of the production. And that's not including the major actors of Jonathan Majors and Glenn Powell and Joe Jonas. There were 8 of them. So 8 principal gentlemen in military costumes, and then different military costumes that were worn at different times for the appropriate occasions. And then also, what's their backstory? Well, what do they look like out of their uniform? So it's creating that whole narrative and really creating the structure around the character that the actor inhabits. It was creatively rewarding because I was working with a dear friend and mentor of mine, Wynn Thomas, who's an extraordinary production designer. He's done incredible Academy Award-winning films over the years. That was a partnership that I found extremely rewarding because I was working with someone who knew me and who stood by me and supported me and championed my work. And as costume designers, we are a part of a creative triad. We're a part of the DP, production designer, and costume designer. We are those 3 key components to the director. And that's a relationship that you want to make sure that you are all on the same page, that you are communicating. And it's the best part of the job is when you're presenting your research and you're sharing ideas, and I love it. That's what I geek out about. I also geek out about special effects, visual effects, concept art. Where we are now in the industry as costume designers, a lot of the projects I work on, I bring on a concept artist because I'm working on projects that mostly have builds or are unique and stories, the visual of what I'm trying to convey for the director's storyline, I need to show it. So getting on and early on into the pre-production phase and doing previs work and concept art is very much now a part of a costume designer's job. And I tend to feel, I tend to now try and feel for projects that have a lot of meaning and substance. I'm not in a particular position to pick and choose whatever I want to do at any given point in time, but I do try to make a point of choosing things that mean something to me
and I feel have something to say about our stories as people of color. That does not mean that those are the only stories I tell as a designer. I'm very diverse in my ability to do any kind of project, but I feel it's a responsibility for me as a woman of color, a designer, and a creator to step in and make sure that I'm leaving something behind that has a very important impact to our culture. So, case in point, I just finished a film at Chiwetel Ejiofor called it's called Raw Peace. It's based upon the best-selling novel, The Tragic Story of Rob Peace, The Incredibly Short Life of Rob Peace. And that will probably air in a year or so. It is for Netflix, and it was produced by Antoine Fuqua. So it was a very profound film, and I'm very proud of it. And that's it.
Well, that segues very nicely to a conversation I had with Rochelle today.
Yeah, so Jamin O'Brien contacted me, so we are going to be doing the post on that one there. So, yeah, I've been helping him, and he's in England, wherever, UK, editing right now. He's going to come back to New York to finish. That's interesting.
Excellent. Small world.
But I was really excited to get to be a part of that film when I got the call. I was like, what do you need happen? And that's my point. It's about relationships, it's about who you know, and when I see stories like Rob Peace, we're going to make it happen. I mean, we're a high-end facility, our rates range, but Harper also started as an independent company, and working with independent filmmakers. So we look at talent, we look at the DPs, we look at their reels. If you don't have the budget, we look at all of those things and take that all into the factor, take into your production value. It might not have money, but it looks good. You know, is it shot well? Is it worth our investment on that? And then we'll figure out a way to make it happen for you. And that's so important here in New York because it's an independent film market. And I take pride in that, and I love being a gatekeeper for that. I'm loving it, I have to say. But my journey, I didn't mention earlier that I have a documentary film in which I took about 8 years to shoot, yeah, in Jamaica on the essence and sound of reggae. So I picked up a video camera a long time ago because I felt it was important to tell our stories. It is because it wasn't being portrayed. And my documentary is on the essence and the sound of reggae. What creates that sound? What are the components that go into that? And I was able to interview a ton of pioneers in reggae music who are no longer with us today. And I'm so thankful for that. I'm in the middle of conceptualizing my second documentary, which is on the Rastafari community and what that entails. And I've been doing my research for the past 4 years and shooting on and off on my free time in between putting budgets together and doing whatever have you. So I'm very excited about that. And because it is all because of my music, my love for music and the love for my culture. Now, when it comes to the work that I've done in terms of episodics, I have, Michael Che show. I have another series coming out, Love and Death, that's on HBO. That's going to be out this summer. I have a few more. I don't want to talk about them because, No, well, those are. I've been along for a couple of years, so which means I have about 6 coming out this year. But I can't really talk about them until they. Yeah, Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Harbor does all of Bradford Young's.
Yeah, so
work.
Joe Galler, our colorist there, is a dear friend of Bradford Young. He was with Bradford when he started, and to my point, Joe supported Bradford when he was on the way up. And so when he was before he did Star Wars, so when he got Star Wars, it was, oh, okay, he brought Joe with him, because like I said, Joe supported him from day one. And that's what I do love about Harbor. No ego, and everyone there is really about the craft. Some of my films that I have is Halloween, Halloween Ends, a film that premiered here, Till, a couple days ago. That was one of my first few films I landed with Bobby Bukowski. There's a ton,
You were just at Sundance with a bunch of films where,
right.
We got to know each other
independent
better.
Films that I supported there as well. There's a lot going on. And it's like I said, it's all a blur. But nevertheless, I'm very excited, like I said, to support the up-and-coming filmmaker. And that's what this is about. It's a below-the-line leadership. And I have to say, through my career, on my way up, because we're a client services industry, and when you work in post, I supported the assistant editors, and I supported the, the people that were coming up. So now they're all leaders and running the companies. And so with that, when I finish my doc, I can go to them and say, edit my piece. I can say, color my piece, and they'll do it for free, because of the fact that I've helped them through their careers. And I can't tell you how important it is to support people on the way, because it's a small community, and everybody knows each other, and they will talk. And also, you're as good as your last job. Isn't that what the set people say? You're as good as your last gig. And I'm also a New York Post Alliance board member, in which we have PIGS, production and gatherings, where there's a lot of below-the-line editors, around, everyone comes there and meet each other on a certain level. We have PIGS every month, and you can learn and you can move, just build your industry, build your network. We have who you don't knows as well, so you can learn so you can meet people as well, online and in person. So you should check out the New York Post Alliance as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Rochelle. I think alliances are the next thing we'll talk about a little bit, because actually, this is part of why you're here, right, at the film festival, is to meet other people who have similar values, right, who, want to see similar kinds of films, perhaps, but also just it is the networking and these organizations, collectives, right, where you have to find a way not to always be asking permission, right, to do your work. And so whether it's an actor, right, you've heard some of them say, oh, it's like you have to see auditions as a chance to perform, right? I think, a lot of this can be isolating or anxiety producing, particularly COVID times, right, and all the virtual stuff. So it's really what I'd love to hear, just because certainly as coming up, I've had all male companies. I used to run a hip hop music video company with 10 male directors, Fat by Freddie, Benny Boom, Nick Quested, on and on. I mean, Andrew DeSumnu, who's amazing, Baron Claiborne, but they were guys, right? And there was a particular culture, particularly if you're making, half of them are booty shaking videos, and others were very political, actually, right, and empowering, and it just depended on the directors. But the environment was sometimes more competitive than it needed to be, I will say, and the women who kind of held down the fort, along with the owner, Nick Quested, we really had at times to say, okay, what are we doing? What are we doing? And have had to reckon some of those. So I had been isolated at times, and thinking about the kinds of, the visual language of oppression, as Nina Menkes has said in her Brainwash, right? And so it's important to keep people around you who are going to hold you accountable to what you've said your values and your goals are, if you actually want to accomplish them, right? And so what are some of the allies, the strategies, organizations that you utilize personally or more kind of systemically, as in the Post-Production Alliance, and both of you as union leaders, right? Because each of you have a role, both, I guess, talking about those individual kind of strategies, but also, I know, Deirdre, we talked about the pay equity conference, so maybe we'll start with you and not Canella this time.
That was my plan all along.
I know this sounds a little formulaic, but I guess I will say that activism and leadership was pretty much in my DNA. My father was a politician and a minister. My mother worked in HR. So I think I came at it naturally and understanding really the importance of relationships and people and listening. Listening was one of the most important skill sets that I think I really learned later on in life. And what I will say, when you listen and you fall back and observe, you learn a lot. You learn a lot about human behavior. You learn a lot about people's behaviors on film sets, how they show up, how they conduct their business or not. And for me, stepping into the role that I am now, which is Vice President of United Scenic Artists Local 829, which is the third largest union in the IA, which is the international governing board that governs all of our unions. It was something that I think I was not looking for, but it happened. And I don't like to say that the situation with George Floyd and that was a flashpoint, because the issues that have been happening around female-led fields and the pay inequity has been ongoing and systemic for years. But it is a part of it, because what people seem not to understand, and I think everyday folk would never understand, is that costume design, the costume department, is the lowest paid department out of department heads. We lag behind our production designers, and we are far and away behind cinematographers. Both of those fields are primarily male positions. And so really, I think what cracked open is that so many costume designers decided to come together and really voice what was really going on in the industry and voice how their pay was inadequate or not close to their colleagues. And conversations have started. This industry is built upon extraction and exploiting, and it's the truth. It is a business that you have to really know your players, and it is also a business that's built on secrecy. Historically, people did not share rates. Historically, people would never tell you what they negotiated, and it's like a Band-Aid was ripped off a couple of years. I'd say within the past 3 years, the momentum has been extraordinary. For me, as a leader, a union leader, for the first time, and I don't mean this in a callous way, but for the first time, I feel that there's real, true momentum building to affect change, and to affect change in terms of pay rates, to affect change in how we negotiate when we are sitting with our line producers and UPMs. Because when you have an exchange of information and your peers are talking to each other and you're saying, hey, this is what I got on this rate, your project is similar to mine, you should be asking for this, then you can go, if you don't have an agent, you are negotiating for yourself. If you do have an agent, your agent is informed. We now have information that is fully transparent, so costume designers know what they should be asking for on these jobs. And it is so empowering. And just for me, I've waited so many years to experience something like this. We just had the Guild Awards, which is our 25th annual Guild Awards in Los Angeles. And we are very active. We will be conducting a pay equity symposium at UCLA, which is going to be headed by Deborah Noodleman Landis, who is the chair of the costume design department at UC Davis. So again, being an activist and being on the front line for something like this is not easy. You do feel like you have a target on your back, especially as a woman of color. It can be very sensitive, and you have to measure your words, but that does not mean that you need to slow your pace. And so where we are right now is we're picking up the pace, and it's an exciting time. I mean, I can say I feel freshly invigorated and affected by what is happening, because it's a full effort. Not everyone's. There's some people who are still on the fence because people are very protective of what they've built over the years, and they're comfortable, and that's fine. But for others, I do this work because I want to leave a legacy behind, and I want to make sure that I've left some knowledge and information for those who are going to come after me.
Thank you, and for doing the work, really. It's important work. So important. Canella, if you could share a little bit about your work with the Directors Guild of America as well as NIFTY, now that I know how to say the cool acronym.
Because you were like, well, it's nifty. I just want to actually kind of piggyback on what Deirdre was saying about the rates for costume designers and production designers. That's one thing I made sure to do in my budget. I was like, oh, let's make sure that this is equal. So that's something that it's like me as a UPM, as now a emerging line producer, now I can budget for pay equity, and I can make that argument with the studios on your behalf, on
And we call it
everyone's
pay
behalf.
parity. So
Parity.
it's like when my last 2 jobs, I was able to achieve pay parity with the production designer,
Yeah.
which was fantastic. But that's not always the case.
Yeah. But that was one thing I just wanted to be like, that was something in particular I remember. I'm like, yeah, they're always paid less. And I don't understand why. Why isn't this equal? It was even the same thing when it comes to set decorators and art directors and
But statistically,
Yeah.
there is no rule, rhyme, or reason.
No.
And the sad part about it is sexism and it is discrimination. Because the majority of costume department workers, from the costume designer to the assistant costume designer, the coordinator, not talking about wardrobe because they're different in the way that they are hourly. So they are able to make more based upon the hours that they work. We technically are flat. So on a flat, you work a 60-hour week, but you're actually working more hours than that. So again,
These things, by the way, extend to credits, which we may
Yeah.
or may not have time to get into, but why is the entire camera department and the AD, department listed, but
ask the DGA
Well,
representative
I mean,
here.
discuss
and
that
now
with
we'll ask the
DGA, well,
DGA person.
so-
But all these things obviously are part of your recognition and value within this whole system, right? And how do you get work is also through your credits. And if you're not credited, what are you? You're kind of being erased, right? And so these aren't benign things happening. And so as leaders, we should look at how these things are related to one another.
So getting into the Directors Guild, before, like, just kind of like a little history, when I had started, and I had said before that I went through the office, that is IATSE, so it's the same international union as most of the crew, and I was in a local called 161, and that is predominantly women. Production coordinators, production accountants, script supervisors, assistant coordinators. The pay is, even though it's union, is terrible compared to our counterparts. Production coordinators are department heads and are paid as seconds, sometimes thirds. Just completely, and this is the person that's running your production in your office, making sure those SAG contracts are in so the actors are getting paid, making sure that the production report is done for the studio. So many things. It's like the blood that pumps there. So one of the things is when I joined the Directors Guild, I wasn't as active as far as 161 with activism. I would complain, but I didn't go in to try to like run for office or anything. When I joined the Directors Guild, that changed. Where pretty much when I joined, I am a new member. I joined at the end of December 2019, then a few months late when I was on the TV show Evil, and then a few months later, the world shut down. And so I took that opportunity to become active. Instead of just sitting on my couch, let me sit on my couch with a computer and do some of those things. So the producer that I was working with at Evil asked me, hey, because again, all of this was going on with, everything was going on with trying to diversify. People were home. So now we could all look at ourselves and see what was wrong with our industry as well as other industries. So people started reaching out. I was also involved in trying to put us back to work with COVID and everything and trying to help people with the white paper, that's what we called it. And so I was involved in that as well with other producers. So he called me and was like, hey, we realize that we're very homogenous in our council, and we'd like to ask you to, we'll try to put it to a vote, because everything's a vote, people vote you in, to be an alternate on the AD-UPM Council, which is Assistant Director and Unit Production Manager Council at the Guild on the East Coast, because there's also West Coast. And so I wrote a statement. They voted. I wasn't there at the vote because I wasn't a member yet, and I was voted in 2020. And so from there, I attended the meetings. Sometimes I was seated, so I was able to vote. And then the chair at the time had asked me to be her secretary treasurer in the next election because she was running again. Decided to do that. And in that time, there's something called the Eastern Diversity Steering Committee. I started going to those meetings. They asked me to run to be co-chair because the co-chairs were stepping down. So I was like, great, I can bring this amazing content, the Guild, and be involved. And so I did that as well. And then there was also the Committee of Joint Co-Chairs, which are all of the DGA West Coast and East Coast diversity committees. Previously, because we were West Coast, East Coast, people didn't use Zoom, all of us were kind of segregated. So there's like the Women's Committee, there's the African American Committee, Latino Committee, Asian American Committee, and then there's the one that I run, which is just encompasses everybody. And there's also focus on women. So we were like, hey, people are keeping us separate. So we decided to join forces. Hey, we're all marginalized women, people of color. So we joined together, East Coast and West Coast, and made a difference. And now we actually have the most diverse national board in the history of the Directors Guild. A lot of us sit on the board, including myself. I was elected in. The ADUPM chair stepped down. I was actually asked to run. I ran against 2 other people and won. So now I'm the head of the ADUPM Council within the small 3 years that I've been in the Guild. But with that, again, when I was sitting at home and out of work for 8 months, I started the New York, Film for Diversity and Inclusion Task Force. And I asked all of my producer friends, all my fellow UPMs, hey, these are the issues, will you help me? In our community, in New York City, in the tri-state area, will you pretty much pledge to make your sets diverse and inclusive? Not just at the entry level, because that's the thing, a lot of people will go and say, oh, well, let's get these interns, which is great. You obviously need new blood in. But I was like, hey, there are people who are mid-level who haven't been given the chance to be department heads. So let's concentrate on those people. Let's concentrate on below the line. Let's concentrate on people who want to be costume designers, who want to be production designers, who want to be post-production supervisors, who want to be UPMs and just don't have the connections and the footing. And we, my counterpart, Galana Lobel, who's also a UPM and producer, she started our mentorship program. And we actually just had an orientation today. We accepted 20 mentees. People have gotten jobs from our mentorship program. So that's something that sets us apart. And we're completely volunteer. It's not an organization. It's a bunch of producers and UPMs who care. So that's something that I've had.
But you also had location scouts and parking.
Oh yes,
PAs.
location
I mean,
scouts,
I find
parking PAs.
about struggles through this email.
Other really like pretty much we've got everybody and
Department heads.
Yeah. But one thing we did do, we have a study that's coming out. So we did like, hey, at that time when we started in 2020, how diverse were the sets? So now we're like, okay, now that we have NIFTY and there's been this whole reckoning, so what is the gender parity? What is the racial parity? So we're doing that again. Hey, did you guys do your job? And if not, why? And how can we change it? Because the data is very, very important. And that's also something even with the Directors Guild as well, where we've worked on getting statistics on how many women directors, how many, you have these big blockbuster movies, but there's never a female first AD running that, or a female UPM, let alone one of color. And it's like, it's a very homogenous thing, and I've been a part of helping the Directors Guild try to figure out how we can navigate that and get all of our members jobs.
I think about the job of the AD, who really runs the set. There's the voice that we hear, right, and the communicator, and is so key. There are very few women ADs, and the system is so hierarchical, right, that I don't know how many third ADs, which is what they call them in Canada, but like every second, and I'd be like, but they'd be crying because of, like, they weren't able to communicate with their male, but it didn't help that we had several ADs, go one after the other. So the sort of continuity in department, communication, comfort, because those are the people dealing with your talent, as well as all the other department heads, right? Negotiating for time. Like, those people have to be in their right minds, emotions, right? And so if those things are happening, part of the leadership is to really, Canella's talking about going and checking in, right? Each morning, all these things. And for me as an executive producer to understand my strengths, and I've had line producers and UPMs that made all the difference in how they crewed things up, how they had the department head who is a Black woman, trying to find people to do black hair in Canada on a very busy time when everybody's working, right? Because everybody went to Canada to do productions when you couldn't shoot here, right? So all the A crew, and then people would crew up seconds, and it was a little crazy, honestly. So your job is to say, okay, how can I support these efforts of my white male line producer, who is amazing? He's an ally, and when he can't pick up, how do we strategize together? But address some of these things, and we'd have real conversations. So I wanted to follow up because I think that it's everybody's responsibility to also see the problem that might be occurring if someone's being a saboteur. So some of the times I was talking about strategies is also, at times you want to be just I'm so tired of this, right? Every day there's this is part of production. But it's also thinking about okay, what's the way I would want to be approached, right? What is the way to approach people to get them to be accountable, but not in a way that's admonishing, but that's really just assuming they want to do a good job, unless they really just don't. And then they can out themselves, quite frankly. I let people, if they really just want to be obstructionists, I say, well, that's a shame, because I know you could do the work. So wondering what the issue is. I don't have to tell you what your problem is. You'll tell on yourself eventually, right? Or you'll correct. And so I want to see, the strategies that I use may not be the strategies other people use. Sometimes I'm I'm going to be out in front and demonstrate in front of, all strategies are useful.
I just want to give some information that could really shine a light on this. So right now, New York is up for their tax incentive renewal. Work has slowed down, and it's not just slowed down here, it's slowed down everywhere. So 2 weeks ago, I was invited to speak in front of Governor Hochul and her assembly senators and assemblymen in support of her proposed tax incentive, which is to increase from $430 to $700, so it can be competitive with New Jersey and Georgia. It's a one-to-one comparison. And that one-to-one and that line item is an above-the-line inclusion of hiring actors and giving an incentive there. Governor Newsom has also implemented, going forward in his new film tax credit, a DEI, I guess it's a 4% or something, that they must have diversity, equity, and inclusion on their sets. They must hire people of color, or they will lose money. They will not receive their full benefit of their tax incentive. So historically, the way you affect change is you incentivize it and you attach it to a monetary value. That is how you affect change. When it affects people's pocketbook and affects people's bottom line, then they're like, Now, the get around and the caveat to that is what Canella said, and not just to hire people at the entry level or bring on interns. That is where things we find from department head perspective, below the line perspective, is that that's where it's bottlenecked. People are not being brought into positions that are value add positions. They're being brought in on low level positions. And so that's something else that we, and myself as a department head and also being a part of a union, we really try to look at, and we really try to make sure we're encouraging that people are being hired at various levels, not just as low level coordinators.
That's interesting
Brava.
that you say that, because as a board member of the New York Post Alliance, a couple of weeks ago, we were supposed to go and talk to Kathy Hochul as well. I had the opportunity to meet her before she got elected as a governor, and I said, I'm here because of the post tax credit. Thank you very much. And I was the only person of color in the room, and I'm sure that was memorable. Hence, you know, I'm not hence, but she's given the post-tax credit the most it's done in the most money in the last 10 years, a serious movement, to the point now I'm getting calls from shows in LA and all over to actually do production, have production here and handle their post. They're analyzing their budgets to see whether or not it's worth shifting productions like Law and Order, FBI, whatever, to New York. You know, that's what's happening right now. And it's with Connecticut, yes.
Yes, it's a part of that
Yes.
whole pot.
So the New York Post Alliance was key in the post-tax credit. We've been advocating seriously. So there was, you know, blizzard a couple weeks ago, so it's supposed to go down March 17th to actually advocate some more for that. And I say this, this tax credit is super important because as a member, we look below the line and we notice, say for instance, as budgets were getting smaller, The Apprentice was being cut out, and how is anyone going to be able to get their foot in the door as an editor if they can't get, you know, through as an apprentice? And so with those jobs being cut out, having a bigger budget helps to, you know, fund those fields instead of putting a PA or an intern into that field who's not going to doesn't really want to focus on that, or, you know, they're not sure. So that's been pretty exciting on the post-tax side.
And also, Governor Hochul is the
Yeah.
person that used to come down to meet with us at the mayor's office when I was working with the Producers Guild. So this is not a new thing for her. She has been that liaison for the film industry and been active in many, you know, in building the site out in Sunset Park. There's, you know, so these things are all, you know, there's a lot of people working on this. I'm on the board, I'm now on the advisory board of Manhattan Neighborhood Network, but I was chair for many years. And, you know, we think about this. So how do you create equity for people? And so we just, you know, launching a new building, opening later this month on West 38th Street, which is in Hudson Yards. And it's public access, right? It's public media access, the largest in the country. And we own 2 buildings, right, here in New York, one in El Barrio, and that's run by an Afro-Latina woman, Zenaida Mendez, who also worked for the mayor's office at times. And all these things are actually funded through the cable subscriptions, right? And the providers, that's, you know, kind of set aside. It's a negotiation that the city helps us with. But let's just say we wanted to have a top-notch facility in a place that was close to industry people, and that's why moving from West 59th to West 38th was really important, to be close to that so that, you know, it wasn't outside, and that we left our building in West 59th, turned into a women's homeless shelter rather than a new condo unit, which we have plenty of in New York, honestly. So I think when we talk about, sorry, Canella, maybe you were going to say something, about leadership, we can really think about it, you know, in every aspect of our lives. And, you know, I think it's both the big things, but also, like, you know, people are like, I don't know any women who work in the, well, you know, we live in New York City. You can go to events, you can go meet people, you can have dinner with people, right? And when someone says to me, well, I don't, you know, I think people of color or black people wanted to, I said, well, let me ask you, when was the last time you had somebody in your home that didn't look like you, right? And if the answer is like, never, well, start doing some work internally first, right? I mean, I'm just, like, so there's these big systemic things, but there's also the personal work. So I know we have to wrap it up, and I didn't know if you wanted to add one
I just
thing.
wanted to add something as far as we're talking about Governor Hochul. Mayor Adams also has a special counsel, which I'm a part of as well, and we're working on just bringing film and television, really film, back to New York City. So that's an important thing. And the studios involved, all of the unions and the guilds are involved, and we have some amazing people involved, and like the mayor is listening. So between the mayor and the governor, it's just like a good future for New York film and television.
It's a good time to be honest about what you want to create in the world. And honestly, it's just, life is short. Why pretend to be and something you're not, and work on things you don't feel you'll be proud of. So that, I think, is about leadership and legacy. And I don't know if anyone has any questions. Do we need to wrap up now, or? Okay. So if anyone has a burning question, this woman had her hand up first, so we'll go with it. And then we can talk with all of you after. Yeah, I think she's bringing the mic. Oh, okay. You go ahead. If we can do more than one, that'd be great.
Hi. First of all, lovely meeting you. Thank you so much for sharing all your experience. I'm going to make it quick since there are other people waiting. So I'm originally from Turkey, and I decided to, I've already had one feature here in the US that I did all female cast and crew, actually, except the priest, because priest, father, male. So I thought, you know what, I'm sick of seeing projects in Turkey where every single project there's a woman crying. Why can't we do sci-fi? Why can't we have our Uma Thurman Kill Bill? Why don't we do that? Why? Because we're a male-dominated society. So sitting at home 8 months during COVID, I write a story, I get the funding, I go to Turkey with my family. We shoot everything, and what I realize, everywhere I go, line producer, DP, distributor, everyone is male. And you have a 28-year-old girl, hey, I'm the producer of this project, of something that nobody's probably going to watch because it's sci-fi where women are fighting. The biggest, and post-production, my God, it is so hard to find great people who can put a project together. Finally, after almost 2 years, post-production is about to get finalized, hopefully next month. So I can relate to everything you just said. My biggest problem with my own project was, as a female, younger female in the industry, in my own country, it's not even black, white, where are you from? In my own country, I have struggled so much to the point where I go to these meetings with my uncle, knowing the men who are running the whole show, they don't respect you. As women, black women, who have done everything, what would you recommend? What would you say really drove you to do better and get your strength in this industry, another male-dominated industry, pretty much still in the US too?
So 2 things. I have a Turkish woman producer you should meet, Volga Calderon, who's a good friend. We talk about this quite often. Istanbul is one of my favorite cities. So I've thought often about filming there. And so we talk about, well, how do you build and find those places? So let's talk afterward about that. And for me, a lot of this is about, like, the things that people told me, as I was pitching as a young writer-director. After already having a movie on WGBH while I was still in college, it would sort of like, before you know it's supposed to be too hard, you could pretty much do whatever, right? And then it's only when the new gatekeepers who don't value you start to tell you. And I think I had the counterpoint of parents who were very progressive, right? Family, other artists that I knew, growing up in New York City. And I think New York's kind of a unique place, so I wouldn't, but it's also, I was part of artist collectives, and I would just, I wouldn't keep quiet about what I was going through. And so I think that's important to have allies, sorry.
I was going to say, just never give up and find those allies, make your voice heard. That is very important. Don't let anyone shut you up, and you will make change because other people will see you and they'll join with you, and you're going to make the pathways for the next person like you, for the next woman to come up in Turkey or anywhere and be treated as an equal. But that's like how I take it. I'm like, well, who else is going to do the work if I don't do it? And I was like, it's too important. It's the skin I live in. It's me. So I have to.
Yes, and try to come up with some solutions, right? I always think that constructive criticism is the most helpful, right? Not just as like kvetching or monkutaro. I can say complain in many languages. But I think it's like, okay, what might work? Because I think that also centers us and empowers us, right? When you feel like, oh, there's, sometimes we're out of ideas. So that's why you need those cohorts. Do we have time for one more question, or should we? Oh, okay. So we'll talk afterward. Really, thank you. I want to thank Athena And also New York Women in Film and Television. I would be remiss otherwise. I'm a proud board member, and they are a tremendous ally. If you are not a member, you should join. We also have the Muse Awards coming up later this month in March, and we amazing honorees. So, you know, there's ways to volunteer if you can't afford the not so cheap tickets. But I thank you again and look forward to getting to meet all of you.